Good morning, good morning, good morning. I want to thank you all again for chiming in on the podcast, being avid listeners on the channel. I truly appreciate the emails. I've got a couple as far as this topic that I'm going to speak about today, but I'm not going to waste any more time. I'm just going to jump right into it. So recently, for those who are followers of social media, I didn't get this information until I watched Sports Center, and I saw that Stephen A. and Max were talking about Kanye West and his comments about slavery being a choice. And so I went on to, because I saw exactly what they were saying, and I don't want to say I immediately understood exactly what Kanye was coming from, but I will say that I understand where he was coming from. It didn't take a while. It took a couple minutes for me to think for a second and to actually. And so what I did was I researched the actual interview that he had with TMZ, and of course everyone else started backing it because I believe most African Americans today really don't understand what this man was actually saying. And because Kanye, and I'm not going to excuse Kanye West. Kanye West has a poor delivery when it comes down to speaking to people, because people really are stupid. And so, of course, I have my family members, and they're thinking that, oh man, this guy's crazy. He calls that a choice, like it was a lifestyle that they chose, like they chose to get hung from the trees and things like that. And I was saying to myself, well, you know what? Maybe it's time for me to say something. So I was sitting down, and I was sitting down with a group of older people, and I gave my thoughts. I sat back and I let them talk, and I let them talk, and I let them talk. And then finally I had enough. And I said, I would like to say something, exactly how I said it. And everybody got quiet because I was sitting there and I was quiet the whole time. And I'm not really, verbal with this group of people, but I decided to be verbal because they heard about it as well. And I didn't know they were even into watching stuff like that. And getting them to realize exactly what was going on, I felt the opportunity to go ahead and speak my piece. So I spoke it. I said that we got to understand the context and what Kanye was choosing from. When we hear the word choice, we think, oh, okay, I'm hungry, so I want to go eat at Taco Bell, or I want to go eat at Burger King, or I want to go out to a restaurant, or I want to cook dinner at home. But that's what we think about as a choice. We don't go to the extremes when we think about choice. Kanye wrapped up the entire interview by saying that it was a choice, and immediately, like flies on doo-doo, we jumped on it and said that, this guy's crazy. But do understand this: the slaves did have a choice, and I'm going to give you the choices. The choice was either you do what your master says, which was whatever it was going to be, whether it was going to, I want to sleep with this woman, she better obey me. You better go out there and pick that cotton until your back peels over. You better go cut them sugar canes. You better go do whatever I tell you to do. Or, here comes the choice, die. Now, that is a choice. Now, people don't understand that many of the slaves chose to die. And I'll give you examples. But when we think about these choices, it wasn't as if there were no choices. There were choices. They were just very limited, and there was major consequences for these choices. Now, you got to look at how the slave masters used death as a choice. They gave them a choice. You can either die or you can work. Well, you got to understand, some of the Africans believed that they would be resurrected upon their death. And so, to keep them from choosing death, the slave masters would take their bodies, mutilate them, decapitate, dismember, burn, in front of the slaves, the remaining slaves, the children, the men, the women, just to show them that I'm gonna rob you here in the living, and even when you die, because they was accustomed to the first early slaves to believe that they were going to be resurrected. When you die, your body will not be able to be resurrected because I've dismembered it. So they chose I will say the greater of the two evils, you know. And even when you go further towards abolition, Harriet Tubman once said that she freed hundreds and hundreds of slaves. She could have freed thousands and thousands of slaves if they only knew that they were slaves, meaning that most of them didn't quite understand what they were. So you had two different types of slaves. You had those who knew what they were and had an idea that freedom was obtainable, but you had to make a choice. Harriet Tubman also said she carried a revolver, a pistol, because when she would go and rescue the slaves and they would get out in the middle of the woods, if any of those slaves decided to get cold feet and say, I'm going to turn around and go back, she would kill them, because them going back, they were sure to tell where the rest of the slaves were. It was already in them, and she knew that. We also got to keep in mind that the choices, like, okay, I don't 100% agree with Kanye, but I understand exactly where he was coming from, and I do agree that there were choices. But I don't agree about the definition of the choice as far as what they could actually choose from. It's really like, it's not a choice, but there are choices. It's like a choice that you don't want to choose. Would, like, somebody would say, give you a hypothetical. Would you rather chop off your arm or chop off your leg? You know, you're like, but you got to choose. You know what I mean? It's the same thing, just on a greater scale. So, now going back to the what I was going to add to that, people got to understand that there's a difference between the choices. Some choices were worth the risk for the slaves who were not born into slavery. For the slaves that were not born into slavery, they took the choices and the chances of their freedom. Slavery didn't start in America. People got to understand that. Slavery didn't start in South America. Slavery didn't start in the Caribbean islands. It started in Africa. And of course, you have different other forms of slavery, you know, warfare slavery around the other continents as well. And so when you have like just like today, if we have our freedoms and someone comes and binds us and bounds us down and tell us you got a choice, you either gonna stay where you are or you're gonna die, consequently making your punishment greater than you complying. If you don't believe me, just think about the people that are in prison. Why don't those guys and those women try to break out? Because they can't. They understand that there's a choice. I can choose every single day to break out, but eventually I know that the task of breaking out is far greater, and I would rather take the easier road and sit and wait for my freedom to come. Many of the slaves thought the same way, and often the slaves and inmates die in their incarceration and in their bondage. Now, back to people being born free and born slaves. When you were born free and you were captured, you had an idea. You already knew what was freedom, what freedom tastes like. So therefore, the choice was like 50-50. I'm going to choose my freedom. And many of the slaves did. They jumped off the ships. Many of the slaves did not make it over into the Americas and to the Caribbean islands. They died. And then you had those slaves that were born into slavery. All they knew was slavery. You know, think of those infants and those kids. The people who they looked up to were slaves. You know, your idea of slavery was everything that you knew. So you didn't know anything. You didn't know anything else. So it's not like you can choose better. Oh, Now there were those who were naturally rebellious, but they was more compliant because of the things that the slave masters did: butt breaking, breeding farms, rape, killing, mutilation, feathering, and tar and whatnot. You have all those things to consider. Kanye West was right. There were choices, but it just wasn't the choices that we believe the choices were. Let me know what you think in the comment sections below. If you enjoyed the content, share it. If you didn't, share it. Hit me up in my email for any suggestions. Make sure you hit the like button, subscribe, and you guys stay blessed.